Hi, and welcome to Thrive 2020, the conference that's designed to help you live out the gospel in your workplace. And it's all very well to know that we can be a positive kingdom influence where we work, but the question is, well, how? Which is why Thrive is all about encouraging and equipping you into action. This conference is packed with inspirational teaching, deep reflection, and honest discussion. If you're a Christian in the workplace, then this conference might be exactly what you need to help jumpstart your kingdom influence in your place of work. What is Thrive? 6 letters, 6 themes. THRIVE. It stands for teaching, harvest, refreshing, inclusion, vision, and ecosystem. These themes span 8 days. We're talking 12 webinars, 16 speakers, multiple cities in Scotland, all in this one national conference. So we're so glad that you're here. Check out the program, look at the topics, have a look at the times, see what really speaks to you. And get ready because we're going to be starting very, very soon.
Hi folks, welcome to Thrive Conference 2020. It's great to have you here. If you're joining us for the first time, extra special welcome to you. If you've been engaging in conference since we started last Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and enjoyed those sessions and also our Saturday conference, it's fantastic to have you back with us. Thanks so much for being here. Today's the first of our spheres of influence, and these will be running from today through to Thursday. How awesome was our conference on Saturday? We covered our inclusion theme, and we had Andy Bannister from SOLAS, Roz Loker from Transform Work UK, and then we moved on to vision with Ken Yankee from Global Advance being our conference sponsor. We had a breakout time at lunchtime, just an informal networking, an opportunity to meet different people from different cities across Scotland, which was fantastic. And then we came back into our ecosystem theme, and Tony Hodges from City Vision. Tony's got a vision to bring business, church and local government together to impact our cities. And then we went into our city breakouts where again, we had that small group conversations. And what would that look like if we could come together as individuals in a city to impact our city and start to develop relationships across the cities of Scotland? Absolutely fantastic. We finished with a commissioning prayer with Ken Yankee from Global Advance, and really committing what lies ahead to God. Really that we would use our giftings, our time, our resources to build the kingdom in Scotland. Fantastic time on Saturday. We've hundreds joining the webinar and also through our social media streaming, which is fantastic. A reminder to check out our virtual bookstore. You'll see the bookshelf at the top right there. If you click on that, that will take you to the bookstore. And one of the books that is there I would highly recommend to you is Thank God It's Monday by Mark Green from LICC. So please check that out. Some introductions now. My name's Jim Grimmer. I'm co-founder of the Business Connection, your host for Thrive 2020. My day job is as CEO and founder of P3 Business Care. My own background, 20 years as a police officer in Aberdeen, 20 years in various management roles in the oil industry, Aberdeen being my home city. And I saw a massive need to take some kind of personal and proactive support to employees working in partnership with the employer, hence P3. P3 from a biblical perspective is actually from Proverbs 3 that says wisdom bestows well-being. We have male and female business partners that visit our client companies a couple of times a week. We develop trust and relationship with employees so that we can proactively identify and address issues before they become crisis or absence. We operate as a social enterprise and we are supporting companies all over the UK. I'm delighted to be hosting the government and public sector sphere of influence today. And really it's an honour and privilege both for the Business Connection and for me personally to be having this fireside conversation with Kate Forbes and Richard McCallum. Just an introduction to Kate. Kate is the member of the Scottish Parliament for Skye, Lochaber and Badenoch constituency. She's Cabinet Secretary for Finance in the Scottish Government. Hi Kate. Welcome.
Hi.
Great to have you here. Until Kate was elected as an MSP, Kate was employed as an accountant in the banking industry, and prior to that studied history at the universities of Cambridge and Edinburgh. On the 27th of June 2018, she was appointed as Minister for Public Finance and Digital Economy. And later that year, she won the One to Watch category at the annual Scottish Politician of the Year Awards, having been made runner-up the previous year. On the 6th of February 2020, Kate made history by becoming the first woman to deliver a budget statement at either of the Scottish or Westminster parliaments. And on the 17th of February this year, she was promoted to the role of Cabinet Secretary for Finance, again, the first woman to hold the post. Awesome. Welcome, Kate. It's so good to have you here. We really appreciate your time, you giving them your time, because we know how time is so precious for you at the moment. So warm welcome to you.
Delighted to be able to join you.
Thank you. It's great to have you here. Just want to introduce Kate's colleague, Richard. Richard is Director for Health, Finance and Governance at the Scottish Government. His responsibility. Hi, Richard.
Hi, Jim.
Great to have you here. Thank you. I'll just explain that you've got responsibility for the effective stewardship of the £13 billion health and sport portfolio budget. Richard's finance career began with KPMG, where he worked in external and internal audit functions. And since 2010, he's worked at the Scottish Government in various roles, including a 2-year stint where he headed the Financial Services Department at NHS in Fife. Outside of work, Richard is a treasurer and vice chair of the Hot Chocolate Trust, a charity working with young people in central Dundee. So welcome to you, Richard. I was just saying to Kate, really appreciate you giving him your time. It's one of these things at the moment where time is so precious. I know how busy you are, so really appreciate it.
No, it's good to be here, Jim. And as a deferential civil servant, it's something to be here with the minister. Normally, I have to refer to my fellow member, panel member, as the Cabinet Secretary or Miss Forbes. So I'm having a bit of a crisis of confidence referring to the faith today, but I'll do the best I can.
Listen, thanks, guys. That's so good. We have a Q&A and chat facility running. You'll be aware of. You can see it on your screen there. So please feel free, as delegates to the conference today, social media, etc., to be posting questions. They'll be moderated and be fed to me as we progress through our conversation. And we're also streaming live through the Business Connection and Scottish Christian Broadcast social media channels. So please be picking up on that and be sharing as well. It'll be awesome. It's not often we get a chance to respond directly to such senior members of the government and civil service, but as delegates to the conference today, I want to give you that opportunity. I have a question. I've got to run a poll, a question with 4 responses. So you see the poll come up on your screen. If you're on a desktop PC, don't do anything. You just need to press a response to the question. If you're on a mobile device, there's a small screen icon at the bottom of your mobile. You see that. If you click on that, that will take you to the poll. So I'm just going to open the poll as we speak. And there you will see the question. And as a Christian, what is the biggest concern you have as far as Scottish society is concerned? Just feel free, go ahead and start answering, giving your response. Education of our children, equality of individuals and families in regard to opportunities, freedom to promote your faith, management of the nation post-COVID-19, obviously the challenges around health, unemployment, etc. So just give you a few seconds if you want to give your response to that question. Education of our children, equality of individuals in regard to opportunities, freedom to promote your faith and management of the nation post-COVID-19. Seeing some responses coming in there, that's great. Just give you a few seconds to respond. Increasing numbers coming in all the time. Interestingly, at the moment, freedom to promote your faith is the top answer. Just give you a few more seconds to complete that. Okay, I'm just going to end the poll and then we'll just display the results to that. So there you can see 47% actually have a concern around being able to promote our faith. And not surprisingly, the next it's 32% in looking at the management of the nation post-COVID as we come out of COVID-19. That's great, thank you. I'll just come back to the video. We'll be touching upon some of these responses during our conversation. Guys, can I start by asking how you manage the tension of your Christian faith as leaders in the public domain? Kate, obviously a very senior minister. Richard is a senior civil servant, and manage that tension of faith whilst maintaining the political correctness that's expected, in today's society. Maybe start with ladies first. Kate, do you want to give a response to that?
Thanks so much. And it's great to be able to join you. I get very excited when I have the opportunity to talk about faith and politics. And I get excited when other people want to talk about it as well. And I suppose in terms of that question, I could ask anybody that's listening that same question, because we all, just part and parcel of our faith, have to manage that tension of having faith in a world that doesn't necessarily share our views. Nurses have got to contend with that. Business people have to contend with that. The police have to contend with that. Public sector workers have to contend with that, because we're all living and working in a world that's different to us. And all of us have to be two things at the same time. On one hand, we're called to be distinctive and faithful. And on the other hand, we're called to be present, to love our neighbours. To love your neighbour, you've got to know who your neighbour is. Yeah. And I grew up, just as a brief aside, in India, in a country which was predominantly Hindu, therefore a country in which the structures of society, the common religion and communities was very different to my own. And I would draw on a lot of the learnings I had growing up in that context here in Scotland. And in terms of my job, in the same way that I guess a nurse wouldn't describe themselves as a Christian nurse, they'd probably say they were a nurse who's a Christian. So also, I am a politician who is a Christian, and that is as much a part of my identity as my gender or my age or my background. These are things that I can't leave behind. I can't cut them out. And therefore, they have to come with me to work. And I think in the spirit of your theme of inclusion, if it's important that other people can take their full selves to work, then surely it's important that I can also take my full self to work.
Awesome.
Two immediate answers would be, one, I would say that the Bible, Jesus has something to say about every single issue that impacts on humanity, and therefore he has something to say about every element of my job, and I care about what he has to say about that. But secondly, I would say that every Christian leader in the pages of Scripture have had to pick their battles. There's some battles they didn't fight. There's some battles they did fight, and I won't go into details about Daniel and others. Same, 21st century Scotland is no surprise to God. It hasn't rendered him incapable of intervention or action. He's not looking at Scotland thinking, my goodness, I've never seen anything this bad. You see him intervening in the pages of Scripture, and I think he's still active.
So good. Yeah, I love that. It's such an encouragement for people that are watching, I think, in whatever sector that you're working in, that you are in that particular sector, but you're also a Christian, and you take both of them into the workplace. Richard, you've got some thoughts?
Yeah, no, so I would agree with all of those comments, and I think particularly the point about bringing your whole self to work. I mean, it can be a bit of a buzz phrase, but we talk about that, and we say that that's true, and that's equally as true for me as a Christian as it would be for anyone else, or somebody of no faith or a different faith. I'm in a slightly different role as a civil servant to somebody in frontline politics. I'm governed by the civil service code, and that requires me to do various things. But one of the things that's set out is to act with integrity, and that's interestingly defined as putting the interests of public service above my own personal interests, and also being impartial. And that means that whoever's in government, trying to serve them as best I can. And interestingly, if I was a civil servant in London, as opposed to Edinburgh, some of the priorities of that government are quite different to the government we have here in Scotland. And so I have to think, and I have to work that through as a nurse or anyone else would, in terms of how I engage, how I act, how I take forward my work. I think you have to show discernment and wisdom in all of these things. But one thing I would say, I guess the question was premised on it there being a tension. And I think you can flip that a bit and say there's a lot of things that serving in government, serving in civil service, where that tension doesn't exist. And actually, there's a lot of things that are going on that I think as Christians and the church should be really excited and be getting behind. A couple of weeks ago, the Programme for Government was released by the government. I think there's an awful lot of things that if Christians and the church read what was in that, there'll be things to get enthused and excited. So yeah, there'll be tensions, absolutely. But there's a lot of things that we can hold on to that are really positive and really good as well.
Yeah, so good. But I think we'll come on to that in part of our conversation, give you a chance to share more around that. I just want to ask, we've been speaking about COVID-19, obviously, and how you've managed personally the stress. I mean, we had a fantastic Friday with Dr. Tarek on our refresh theme, speaking both biblically and practically, how we can manage stress, how we can get rest and refresh. But, so aware for you guys, both in very senior positions. Kate, you had literally just taken up your post as Cabinet Secretary for Finance in February when COVID happens. You're thrown into lockdown, etc. Richard, yourself, you're managing a very significant budget for the NHS, which is then put under strain like never before. So all of this responsibility, human at the end of the day, I can imagine working extremely long hours in a real pressure cooker environment. So just share some thoughts on how you've been encouraged, I think, as well, maybe to others, how you've actually managed to cope with that stress and effect. Richard, you want to kick off with that?
Yeah, so Jim, undoubtedly it's been tough. I'm conscious that it's been tough for a number of people, whether it's people working in the NHS or in other roles. I'm conscious as well it's tough for people in other ways because they might be losing their job or have that threat of losing their job as well. I think for me what's really important is to kind of be honest and know what your role is in terms of responding to this, because in some ways, there's so much going on in response to this COVID pandemic. It would be completely overwhelming. And I work with some great clinical colleagues, and you'll have seen some of them on the TV and other places, and the way that they've led has been incredible. And the kind of leading of that public health response has been something else. But that's not me. That's not the skills that I have. I'm not a clinician, but I can bring other things to that leadership table that they really can't bring. And so I think, there's something about knowing your role and how you can help and shape others. I think a couple of other things. One, important to talk to people. I mean, we're all working from home, and actually you can spend your day on meetings, but not really properly talk to anyone. And I think having those kind of honest conversations with someone you trust about how you're finding things, I think that's really critical. And I think for me, on a kind of more personal Christian level, I think for me, having daily Bible times, praying at the start of each day, going to church, even if virtually on a Sunday, I think having those rhythms in my week is really critical, really important. It doesn't make a magic day, it doesn't make all the problems go away, but I think that it just grounds you and roots you. And I think remembering that you have been put into whatever role you might be, whether it's in government, whether it might be in another career completely, for a reason in terms of how you serve. And I think trying to hold that in your mind with all that's going on and know that apart from Christ you can do nothing, having that in mind and having that upholding you is so key.
Yeah, so good. Kate, again, I can imagine, we've seen Nicola Sturgeon on doing our daily briefings, etc., for so many months now. And yeah, just again, from your perspective and the role that you're undertaking.
Yeah, well, next time anybody who's listening is starting a new job and thinking that the induction is pretty tough, spare a thought for me, who had to deliver a budget pretty quick and then got launched into a global pandemic. So it has been an absolute pressure cooker. And it was a case of picking up the skills of a new job whilst at the same time having everything thrown at you. But I mean, my job, and working actually with Richard on this, is to make sure that there's the money to do everything. So it's looking right across all the different initiatives, schemes that government is involved with to make sure that there's capacity there to deliver. So it was hugely under pressure. I used to often think, before I was in politics actually, but even when I was in politics, that I would never want to be in a position of national leadership during a war, because there are no right answers. If anybody likes their history and looks back at any of the world wars, there's no right answers because you can't see the future, and hindsight is a glorious thing when you're looking back. And I think that the challenge of the last few months for everybody has been the unpredictable nature of the virus, the unpredictable impact it's had, and the distress. Businesses getting in touch in distress, individuals getting in touch, families, children, and trying to help and support. So, I'm no stranger to hard work, but I'd say the volume has been absolutely phenomenal in the last few months. And the only reason I say that is not to get sympathy, but it's because I think I think there's two challenges. One, we're brilliant at denigrating our political leaders. We're great at pulling them up for all the mistakes they've made. But, who'd want to be a leader in an unpredictable time like this? And I have the greatest of respect. You may disagree with our politics. You may not vote for our party, but I have the most phenomenal respect for the First Minister in that context, for stepping up and being willing to take the decisions, because it does take nerves of steel and a real sense of the detail to be able to do that well.
Yeah, fantastic. It's when your comments there actually leads on to my next thought about criticism. it seems to me that we're looking at spheres of influence this week, as I said, and tomorrow we've got financial and legal. On Wednesday we've got energy and climate, and senior figures within those sectors certainly seem to be distanced or protected in a lot of respects from the overt criticism that you can get. But yet, yourself, First Minister, etc., in very public roles, not so. And that criticism, I would imagine, is difficult to deal with at times. Do you want to touch on that? Do you look at social media and comments and things like that? How do you actually manage that?
Yeah, for me, criticism is as common as breathing in this job. It's part and parcel of the job. I'd say that I used to say when I was first elected that it was the first experience I'd ever had of being hated, because, in normal life, you're used to falling out with people, you're used to mildly disliking people, slagging them off. In this job, it goes from people seeing what you've done or what your allegiance is to, or what party you're a member of, and then going to hate. And I would say there's two types of criticism. One is almost legitimate, so it's the mistakes that we make in a fishbowl, and that's just the nature of it. It's scrutiny, it's accountability, and sometimes it feels unfair, sometimes it's perfectly fair. But that's challenging, learning how to do a job in a fishbowl. The second part is, I would say, that at a time where trust in politicians is at an all-time low, funnily enough, just at a time when we most need effective politicians, and there's a real desire to cause pain and to cause hurt. And people are very creative with their criticism. So so many studies have shown that criticism is one of the number one reasons why people don't go into stand for politics. And that's a problem when we need talented leaders. We need people that are committed with a sense of public duty. And that's where I guess I'd challenge Christian voters to be different in how you treat people, how you speak about people you disagree with, how you dismiss them. Every election, people resign or leave because, frankly, it's a challenging job with so much exposure to the most painful of criticisms. And we just have to put up with it, and you get used to putting up with it. But some of it errs into, I think most politicians would have had experience of police involvement in some form of vitriol and anger that potentially led to physical actions. So I suppose the two things I'd say is to Christians to be different, encourage your leaders, build them up and pray for them. And secondly, pray for politics to change and for some of that vitriol, which is so prevalent on social media, to die down.
Mm. It was interesting. I was reading an article on the Christian.org website, actually, just published last month, and I can just quote from this article. He said, "There used to be a day when I would respect you as a human being, then have fun disagreeing or arguing with you or debating your views. Now it's if I don't like your views, I hate you, and I will let you know that I hate you. That's undermined the quality of our debate." So, yeah, I think, just as you're saying, I think that it is damaging, the opportunity to have open and honest conversation. About yourself, Richard, in your own role, I know maybe not as public profile as Kate, but criticised perhaps nevertheless.
Yeah, so I think just to touch on that last point, and I see it on Twitter. You only need to see a politician a fairly bland comment sometimes, and just the vitriol that follows that. And I think that should bother us, actually. It should bother the church. It should bother Christians that there's that level of kind of debate and engagement happening. I think it is troubling, and I think it's changed a lot over the last 10, 15 years, where that kind of what people say. Twitter can be great, but it can also be quite damaging as well. I think we've really seen that. Yeah, I mean, I'm probably in a similar way to people in other organisations, in the sense that I don't have that such a public, criticism coming my way. But yeah, of course you get criticism. I think for me, it's always the key thing is trying to be discerning about these things, isn't it? It's partly sometimes where the criticism comes from. So does it come from somebody who you trust, who you respect? You understand why they're giving you that criticism. Sometimes people can do it in a way that is not always that helpful, but it's just trying to get beyond that and say, well, is there something there in what they say? And let's face it, we probably all get better in our jobs through a bit of criticism. If we're only ever getting patted on the back, then we're not challenged to change. So I think there's some positives in it as well.
Okay. Yeah, great. I just want to start with yourself for this point, Richard, and you touched upon it earlier on. And how does the church get a seat and influence at the decision-making table? I know it's very much in your heart, perhaps to share around the national performance framework. And that provides a clear vision for Scotland, covering a range of economic, health, social, environmental indicators and targets. So it's a question we actually touched upon on Saturday at the breakouts. You know, what can we be doing as churches? I shared an example from my own church in Aberdeen that reached out to the CEO of Aberdeen City Council, developed a fantastic relationship that led to some amazing things happening in the city. But yeah, I'd really be interested for you to share a little bit more on the national performance framework.
Yeah, so I think, Jim, in the first point, I think we shouldn't be too pessimistic. I think the church does and can have a seat at the decision-making table, and not to forget that. I mean, you touched specifically on the national performance framework, and you know, for those that haven't seen it or don't know what it is, you can find information about it online. But in a sense, it's setting out the country that we want Scotland to be effectively, and there's a purpose in it and the values that we want to see. And then there's a range of indicators, from things to do with the economy, from things to do with communities, poverty, the environment, health, all sorts of things. And how is Scotland performing against those indicators? Now, you know, obviously the central mission of the church is not going to be the same necessarily as the mission of a government, and so church's key role in going and making disciples of all nations or whatever is going to look different to the mission of a government. But I think there's a number of things where there's an overlap. There's things that the church can be actively involved in and supporting. I mean, you've touched on a couple of things from your own background, Jim, but you know, there'll be things like how we treat people who are lonely, the elderly. Can we support them? People that are in poverty, and can we help support people? Poverty Cap and others do great work. Children and young people, things related to health outcomes. There's a whole range of things that I think, you know, the church can and should be actively involved in. And I think, you know, again, you know, these things need to be thought through. There needs to be good, you know, sound, you know, logic put to them. But I think there's ways in which that can happen, and I think there's ways in which churches, either nationally or certainly at a local level, can have a really positive influence.
Yeah, great. One of the questions from the audience come in, if you feel that church is respected these days, I suppose it's one thing for us as Christians to be in senior roles that totally understand what value that the church can bring. But what's your thoughts? Maybe come to you, Kate. You know, at that decision-making level, when there's not that perhaps Christian influence, do you feel that people still have a high regard for the church and what church does, or is that a message that we need to get across?
It's a great question, and I would say that Scotland has obviously changed considerably in the last few decades, and perhaps I often ask the question, which may not make sense fully, but whether somebody thinks of the church in Scotland as being in Jerusalem or in Babylon. Mm-hmm. In other words, are we in foreign territory trying to, help change society for the better? Or are we in Jerusalem harking back to the golden era of the past, which frankly never existed? Mm. And that answer to that question probably determines how you feel in relation to government or the public sector. My firm view would be that there is great potential, but respect has to be earned. And my encouragement would be to turn up, to care, to pray, to speak, to want. It's achieving nothing to whinge in the pews and to whinge on Facebook. That never changed anything. Mm-hmm. But a lot of our politicians are very accessible. I, for example, have regular surgeries. My email address is a matter of public record, and people talk to me all the time. And whenever I'm speaking at Christian things back in the days pre-lockdown, I would ask how many people in the audience had ever contacted their MSP. And very rarely did I get above maybe a number that I could count on one hand. Mm. So my encouragement would be that if you care, pray. If you pray, do something. If you're going to do anything, it's go speak to one of your representatives who are there to represent you. And don't speak in harsh words. If you're trying to build a bridge, you've got to build a relationship. You've got to build friendship. And people are far more likely to listen if you invest that time. That would be my first point. And if you need any good material on this, EA's material, and I think Kieran Turner is on the line, so here's a shout out to Kieran. Got some great resources. The second part I would say, just because we're coming up to election, is stand. You care about the future of our country. If you're fed up with complaining in the pews, do something about it. Stop harping from the sidelines. Stand. Nobody's stopping you from standing for election. It's up to you what party you're most aligned with, but stand.
So good, so good. It's the classic example of speaking a good game, so to speak. But yet, there's a big difference between speaking and actually taking action. And from a personal perspective, I suppose it's a great suggestion to perhaps look at standing as a candidate for Parliament to gain access to be able to do what God's put in your heart, I suppose, really. Just to share from my own experience in Aberdeen and the value of, as you touched upon, developing that relationship. Our pastor, Ian Duffy, King's Community Church in Aberdeen, AOG Church, created a civic team. This is probably 2-3 years ago now. I was part of that from a business perspective, but we had a doctor in our congregation, we had a teacher, etc. And we started reaching out very informally, really, to senior figures of influence within the city in each of that spheres. And we would invite them for a breakfast and literally have a conversation and say, how can we as church help you? So many times I think people are thinking, being connected to church, what is it they're looking for? But that wasn't the conversation. It was, how can we help you? And that has led to, we've always done an outreach into a challenging area of Aberdeen. Despite Aberdeen being a very wealthy city with oil industry, etc., there are areas of deprivation. And one of our congregation, fantastic guy, Darren Shinney, actually moved into that area with his family and started an outreach, which went really well. But through the relationship with the City Council, we've then been given a building that we are refurbishing, again with funding from City Council, to become a community hub. And all that really started over a breakfast. So just be encouraging to people that are listening. God's put in your heart. We had this conversation on Saturday with the city breakouts. For some people, it's not in their gifting, it's not a vision that God has given them, but there are other people that want to try and do something to bring cities together to develop that trust and relationship. So I think that story is a real fantastic example of how it can work in practice. We're getting a few questions coming in, and it's interesting that this is our next topic, and it comes back to one of the responses in the poll, and that is the hate crime bill. We know that the SNP Justice Secretary, Hamza Yousaf, has been tasked with provision of the new bill. But conversely, we've also started to see increasingly more concerns in the general media. And also, I just wanted to share as well some recent comments in The Spectator. And being a former police officer, I can understand where they're coming from when you look at the bill as it sits at the moment. But the Scottish Police Federation has warned its effects will be tantamount to the policing of what people think or feel. And the Law Society of Scotland had called it a significant threat to freedom of expressions. And I know the media are picking up on it, but should we be concerned as Christians that potentially the possession of a Bible or speaking out scripture in a public place could be an offence? Kate, I know you've got knowledge of the bill. You want to share some thoughts on that? It's certainly been a very prevalent question in the questions that are coming in from the delegates.
Thanks for that, and it's a very good question. I suppose the straightforward answer to your question, which is should we be worried, is no, but the bill is at the beginning of its journey, so it's not a bill that's gone through Parliament. It's a proposal just now, and every bill is changed quite considerably after it's introduced. So it'll go through multiple stages in the parliamentary process, lots of debates, and lots of probably amendments in the process. So it's good to have these discussions and debates up front, and it's been interesting too seeing a number of unlikely alliances. But the second part, I would say, so I don't think, and I think Humza has himself said, he said as recently as last week, that he has heard some of the concerns and he's willing to act on those concerns. There's three parts to the bill. It's part number 2 that appears to be provoking the most debate. The second thing, though, links back to the last question you asked about how Christians get involved. And one of the things that I find enormously challenging is that we only seem to care about politics when it comes to 0.1% of the issues. Mm-hmm. So we're a bit like, every so often we sort of stick our heads above the parapets, lob a grenade over the top into the public sector or into government or into the public debates, and then duck down again and go on our merry ways. And then occasionally we go up again. And that's no way to influence. The way you influence is, as I outlined in my first question, the previous one, which is to build the relationships, to inform, to try and share, to work collaboratively so that we get to a place where there's better dialogue. And that applies to everything. It applies to the hate crime bill. It applies to tons of other legislation that seems to provoke a particular concern amongst Christians. So the short answer is this bill is going to go through its parliamentary process. It's right at the beginning. It's a proposal at the moment. It will probably change. We want to get to a place where we can do two things, which is one, respect freedom of expression, freedom of belief, all the freedoms that are so valuable. And at the same time, there is a problem that we've already outlined with hatred in our society. You can't get away from it. It's not it's not just directed at any particular group. There is a problem with vitriol and hatred, which leads to physical violence. So we all have to try and get that balance right between protecting people, including Christians, allowing and protecting them to practice, to believe, to do what they want to do, and at the same time ensuring that somebody else has the right to criticise me and my faith if they want to.
I suppose it's a big challenge for the whole society, really, to be open to people of other faiths, etc. Ros Loker is doing a fantastic work, the Transform Work UK, just to raise awareness for delegates as well around creating Christian groups within the workplace, but also now multi-faith groups as well. So starting to have that conversation of, I suppose, education and finding out each other's points of view, etc. It's a bigger, wider challenge for society. I guess, literally, I suppose I can see where the Police Federation are concerned that if someone makes a complaint because someone has said something that they feel has been against them personally, they potentially then have the right to phone the police, and you can imagine from a police resources perspective, what that would take up from time, etc. So I appreciate it's at the early stages. I think this is Kieran Turner. You touched upon Evangelical Alliance, and Kieran was sharing last week on the Harvest. I know personally Kieran's got a fantastic relationship with senior figures within the Scottish Government and doing a fantastic work there. So but perhaps as well it's an opportunity to get behind Evangelical Alliance so that they can become a voice from a Christian faith perspective as far as what that bill could potentially look like. Richard, have you some thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, that particular bill is obviously not one in health, so it's not one that I have a kind of close working knowledge of. But I think I just kind of emphasise the point that these things, as we've seen with other legislation, there is a process that they go through, and the importance of engagement with that process. I think I would, maybe just amplify though the point that Kate's made about how we engage, and I know it's come up a couple of times in a couple of the other questions. I was reading an article a couple of months ago. Tim Farron, former Lib Dem leader, others might have seen it, others might have read this article. And on that instance, it was in relation to the domestic abuse bill. And in particular, he was referencing a couple of clauses in relation to abortion that were part of that bill. And he made the point that he got hundreds of emails, letters from Christians about those two clauses, and next to nothing about anything else that was in the bill. And I do think there's something about how that point that's already been made about how the church does engage and that the church should be engaging positively and constructively, as well as raising issues when there are concerns. I think that's really key. And I think, it would be an incredible story if all 120 odd MSBs in Holyrood, all 59 Scottish MPs in Westminster could say, actually, I might not be a Christian, I might not have any faith, but the churches in my local area, I know who they are. They've been engaged with me. They've given me constructive feedback. They've given me constructive comments. Wouldn't that be a great witness to actually have in Scotland? And that's maybe something that the church should be thinking more about.
Yes, yeah, completely agree. It's one of the exciting things, I think, post Thrive Conference and the Business Connection. Could there be a business connection in every city in Scotland? We've got a fantastic partnership with Business Matters Edinburgh, Eric Smith, going back to 2013 when we first got connected in the Business Connection, then potentially being able to connect with individuals within our cities that can then have conversations with their pastors and start this conversation ultimately about how we can impact our cities. I think it's a fantastic opportunity in a lot of respects. It's interesting, one of the questions as well is, do we pray enough for our leaders in our church meetings? And I can only speak personally from my own church, and yes, we kind of have a set format for prayers. We gather together for prayer every Monday night, and that's been online, but now starting to get back into our new church building. And we do pray for leaders, both, in Scotland, nationally, globally as well. But thoughts on that? Is there a Christian group within Scottish Parliament that you gather together, or within the civil service, Richard, that you can come together during the week at some point just for prayer?
So certainly in the civil service, there is. Obviously, it's been a bit challenging in recent times to meet together, certainly in person. But there is a group, and there are a number of Christians involved in that group. Jim, I think you're absolutely right, though, and it touches on something that Kate said earlier, that and it's probably easier for me to say than for her, but our politicians and our ministers in government at the moment are working incredibly hard, and they're under an awful lot of pressure, and there's a lot of strain that comes their way, and I guess I can see that sometimes in close quarters, and so when you see a lot of that criticism coming their way, I think we do need to balance that up. And I think there is a real duty for the church to be praying for small groups, whether it's in Parliament or in government or wherever it might be, to be praying and actively supporting our leaders in that way. Yeah, definitely.
I just want to ask your thoughts, if you would recommend to young or older Christians going into politics or wider policy decision making. What's your thoughts, Kate? Politics in your career?
It would be the plea of my heart to see people stand. I cannot emphasize more strongly how much we need people to step up, because let's be honest, you probably will get less grief in nearly every other occupation. So we need people that have a strong sense of public duty, of care for their neighbour, a willingness to grapple with difficult issues. If you think that there are black and whites as you engage with the world, the messy world, then there's plenty of black and whites on a Sunday morning when I'm sitting in church. I can tell you all the black and whites when I'm sitting in church, all 10 commandments of them. Then go out and try and apply them in a world where there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of injustice, and we need people that will grapple with these issues. And my longing is to see, particularly as we come up to next election, with a number of people resigning and stepping down, looking at where's the pipeline of people that will step up and be willing to do these difficult jobs and try and change Scotland for the better. So anybody, I suppose my last offer is anybody who is thinking of perhaps being interested in politics and wants a chat, very happy to talk to you. I don't even care if it's my party, but don't tell anyone that. Just being able to talk to people about what it means to be in this role and to encourage people to stand.
Yeah, Richard, your thoughts, civil service?
Yeah, I think that's great, and agree with all of that. I mean, I think the only thing I would add is it's really quite an interesting place to be. You know, it's whether that's in more kind of frontline politics or if that's in the civil service, forming policy. You know, as you mentioned at the beginning, you know, I came from a kind of financial services background, trained with a large accounting firm. You know, it was fine. It was it got me a qualification, but going into a role where you're involved in shaping things that really influence and really affect people, it's just an exciting place to be. And so actually, as well as the importance of it, which is absolutely true, I think there's a real benefit and a real blessing for you if you find yourself in this line of work.
Awesome. Just looking at questions coming in from some of the audience as well. How do you personally cope having to promote values or manifesto specifics that you don't necessarily agree with as a Christian, which is inevitable whatever party you're in? Kate?
Yeah, so I would say first and foremost that if you think there is a party that perfectly aligns in every respect with you, then I'd perhaps suggest that it is your own personal party and there's a membership of one. So the nature of party politics, and even if you try and get rid of the parties, it reemerges very quickly that people operate in groups, and that's the source of party politics. And I would say that for the most part, it depends, because in my party, certainly, it's still a broad church with a respect for conscience. So and there's debates, there's a forum for discussion and raising these issues. And then when it comes to other matters, again, you know, there are important matters, but there's always scope to make your views known and heard. And I think that for me is vitally important. So the two elements of respecting conscience, and secondly, being able to make your voice known and voice heard. But you know, you could apply that to every organisation you're a member of. I mean, again, going back to my nurse's example, does that nurse believe in everything that is happening in the right now, or do they believe in every decision that's being made? Mm. The police, there's a tough one. Does a police officer believe in everything that? So in each respect, compromise is part and parcel of our daily lives. It's part and parcel of our church lives. It's part and parcel of our work lives. And I would say that perhaps being a politician, it means it's higher profile. But at the same time, the alternative is that you abandon the public square Now, there might be some who believe that we should abandon the public square, but I don't think that's going to make much difference. So I'd far rather see more people stepping up to the plate and being willing to engage than the assumption that the best way we have to live our lives is as a hermit, although it probably would be a lot easier.
Yeah. In your role, governance role, Richard, you come across that from time to time where you're seeing policies that don't quite sit with your faith?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of that is dead right in terms of sometimes, there will be things that you have to compromise and work through, and that requires a lot of wisdom and judgment, I guess, in how you do that. And there might be some things where personally you don't work on certain areas, and other areas that you are more focused on. And I guess there's some things about how you work through that as an individual. But I think, as I said before, yes, there might be occasions like that. My experience is the vast majority of the time it's not like that, actually. And there's actually a lot that you really can get involved in and work in and shape. And there's a real opportunity there as well.
Fantastic. We've got 5 minutes left. Great question, I think. If there's one thing that we could pray for each of you, what would that be? Kate?
Am I allowed to use mine to pray for next year's election, and that people would be elected that really are willing to give their all and grapple with issues and shape our country? That is the biggest burden that I feel right now, to see Scotland being led well by people that care. And I would love to see that. So it's not a personal one, but it's the one that burdens me most.
And potentially has the most impact for the country as well in the longer term. Yeah. Richard, one point for prayer.
Yeah, again, probably not so much a personal one, but it was certainly the first thing that came to my mind. One of the things on the poll was how we respond to COVID and the risks that there are and the opportunities. And I think our prayer should be about that. I think there's going to be some, it's easy to be quite pessimistic about the future in the sense of, the economic harms, the societal harms, mental health, physical health harms. I think we should be praying about the future and what that might look like in terms of how the country responds. And I actually think what are the opportunities for us as a country to respond in maybe a different way to how we've thought about things before. I mentioned older people beforehand. Social care has been at the forefront of our response to COVID. I think there's some big questions to be asked about. So I think there's some real, for our political leaders and for leaders in government, there's some real big challenges ahead. And I think, praying for that, how we respond to COVID, is going to be so important. That's a broad thing, but I think that feels pretty central to me.
Yeah, we did start with concerns, but just briefly, it's 3 minutes left here. What gives you the most hope for Scotland looking forward in the next few years? Kate?
Oh, that is a great question. I think what gives me the most hope is that we're having these conversations more often about how church and the public sector or public square engages. And that encourages me enormously, because I think that we've vacated the public square, and that gives me a lot of hope. And there's some really great people that are talking about these things and thinking about these things. So that I think there is great potential. The other thing, briefly, is exactly what I started with, that sometimes we think 21st Scotland is taking God by surprise. Does he really know what's going on? Is he aware of what's going on? And you think, are you having a laugh? He was there in the Roman era. He was there when the exiles went into Babylon. And you think 21st century Scotland is the toughest it's ever been. So if he can draw Nebuchadnezzar to recognising that he is the most almighty God, then I think there's hope for Scotland.
Amen. Richard, just a couple of closing thoughts.
It feels like we should have ended on that point. And reinforce that. Remember who's Santa, and there's great hope for the future.
It's been fantastic. Guys, I just need to thank you again for giving your time. As I say, I'm sure, will be praying. Our church certainly prays for the leaders, and I think it's been an encouragement for all those that have taken part today to hear more about your own experience, the challenges that you've been facing, and particularly your leadership roles as well. So I know that, like for myself and for others, that we will certainly be lifting you in prayer. So thanks again for giving of your time. It's been fantastic to start our sphere of influence with such a significant sphere of influence in our country, the government and public sector. So thank you guys, very much appreciated.
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure. Tomorrow, I just want to remind you that our next sphere of influence is financial and legal. We've got Colin Stewart from the City Group, who's based in Edinburgh, and Stephen Miller from CMS Cameron McKenna, a legal firm who's actually based in London, to coming together to have this fireside chat conversation again at 12 o'clock through to 1. So please join us again at 12. It's been a delight having our guests today, and for you guys that have been joining the Thrive Conference 2020. So thanks again. Many thanks to you, and God bless. Thank you.
Thanks.